Hello, and welcome to this week's Qredible Live Broadcast. As always, I am here with our CEO and Chairman, Brian Fitzpatrick, and this week we're very excited to be joined by Mike Lomuto. Mike is a board chair for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. He is the founder of Dow Mastery, a coaching program supporting cannabis industry professionals, and the founder of the Equity Workshop Tour. He's here today to discuss fostering a more equitable and inclusive cannabis industry. Thank you very much for being on the show today, Mike. To get us started, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and the work you're currently doing?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. Really glad to be here today. And I really appreciate the platform to be able to discuss the kind of work that we're doing at MCBA. For myself personally, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, depending on how you define that. It's basically been what my life has been focused on for the most part, and taken a lot of different twists and turns. About 10 years ago or so, we started making that transition into the regulated space. California was coming online, a few years after that. So we were kind of getting ready, and things didn't work out. And, I took a step back and I said, okay, was this a problem just with me and my team? Yes, there were definitely problems with that, right? Like I was still learning and figuring that out myself. But at the same time, I also looked and said, this is a much bigger problem than just me and my team. This is a problem that is going to keep repeating itself, not only in the Bay Area, but also around the country. And so my choice at that point was to go and say, okay, let's see what I can do now with all my different things I've done over the years. How can I help to create as much architecture and foundation as possible to help make sure that these resources that we talk about end up being where they need to be, and that the people that I want to see in the industry, and when I say who I want to see in the industry, I mean people that really care about this plant, people that also maybe also don't always have as easy of a runway into the industry, right? So oftentimes that's minorities, oftentimes that's folks that have been disproportionately impacted, oftentimes that's legacy folks that have been doing this for decades already, and sometimes generations even, right? And so I set out to say, okay, let's go ahead and build some architecture for these programs. Let's figure out how to advocate proper. Let's build structure around that, though, so it's not just the desire to have things happen and change, but the structure that can allow for that. And I found lots and lots of people doing the exact same type of work. And that's what we've been doing now for the last several years together, and collaborating and figuring out how to stand this thing up, I think, the right way. And that's how we found each other here too. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And you've been quite a trailblazer in this area, and you've been a tremendous advocate for the industry. So thank you for the work you're doing, because I think it's very important to the growth of the entire ecosystem. And I notice you like to use that word, because that's what it is. I mean, I've heard you use that word, equitable ecosystem, and building that through quality relationships. And I think you've done a really good job in doing that. But as we all know, it's a continuous effort, and we're still in a very nascent time relative to what really needs to happen to make this a fully equitable industry. So you've been traveling extensively, and we were sharing some road warrior stories before, but you've been sort of all over on this Equity Workshop Tour, if that's the I think that's what it's called, right? The Equity Workshop Tour. And you founded that initiative in collaboration, of course, with the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the purpose and scope of what you're trying to make happen and the work you're doing there?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think for me, the Equity Workshop Tour is designed specifically to help bring together and foster the development of what you called, you said it right there on the head, the equitable ecosystem, an ecosystem of businesses, advocates, leaders, regulators, right? We bring regulators and legislators into the ecosystem as well in those conversations. I think, to me, I saw a lot of siloing happening, right? Everybody being siloed off. And I think that's a normal thing in entrepreneurialism in the first place, right? People kind of get head down and working on something. It's a normal thing we see across the board in advocacy. There's a lot of also kind of that divide and conquer strategy that happens, sometimes naturally, sometimes just organically, and sometimes intentional, right? But then you add to that the cannabis situation, where we're not, able to do the kind of interstate commerce that other states can. So people are very hyper focused in their state on top of all that natural siloing that already happens. And I felt like, what? And then add to that the hemp space, where now people are siloing between hemp and cannabis, and it just keeps happening. And so this was about 5 years ago, and I was actually at NCIA at the time when we first started doing these workshops. And I looked and I said, okay, look, I've been doing workshops in different capacities for 20 something years as well. And I said, I think if we can bring the workshops into this kind of a space, that to me was one thing that was missing, right? Love the conferences, love the educational panels, socials, all that kind of stuff. But I think that having a place where you can sit down and really have those roundtable conversations at an intimate level, you're tapping with people that have also decided, hey, I want to be here for an entire day or entire afternoon, morning, whatever it may be, and have this kind of high contact interaction. You're getting really accelerating that ecosystem development, in my opinion, in one day, transformationally, much more than you would by doing a lot of other things, so to speak, that day, right? So that's kind of how it all came about, was how do we put something together that is changeable and malleable based on which market we're in, because everything's different, right? Based on the timbre of that day, what's going on. How do we create a workshop format that's dynamic enough and can change and shift, and at the same time is also standardized enough that we can take this to multiple places? People can plug in regardless of whether they've been to one before, been to multiple. They can go to one's different parts of the country and still have the same experience of being able to tap in with people that they want to be in business with, they want to be in alignment with, they want to be in advocacy work with. Another piece I'll mention is that we really focus on making sure that we have both the business component and the advocacy policy regulatory component, because in cannabis, I think, and you all know this better than most, you can't take the two and put them apart from each other. In cannabis, you have to be up on the regulations and all that kind of stuff, regardless of you're an operator or not. And then you also have to make sure you don't ignore the business development side of it either. So that's how the tour kind of came to be.
Yeah, and I think it's hugely valuable because, first of all, it's interesting. We put out a piece on social equity and DEI, and we've got some negative comments on it, and I'm sure you run into some of that controversy, and you're used to dealing with it. But to me, it's pretty simple, and it really goes back to in every industry, you want an equitable industry, right? So. Obviously, we understand the historical reasons and why that needs to take place. But it's just to me, it makes sense to having truly an environment where everybody can really participate in a way that's fair. And I know, my good friend Faye Coleman. I don't know if you know Faye, but she's a New Jersey cannabis executive here, and very, very accomplished Black woman in business. And, she said, these social equity programs makes it so, they stick us in the front of the line so we can hold the door for everybody else with money. And, and I know that's a hurdle, the capital barriers. But it's not the only, it's a significant one, right? So you want to see how we can create programs to help solve that, because if there's limited access to financing, which because of the federal prohibition in cannabis to begin with, that's common for everyone. All right. But there's regulatory hurdles, and, talk to us a couple for a couple minutes about these hurdles and how you help to overcome some of these.
Yeah. So, and this is probably like a 10-hour conversation, right? That could go and keep going, right?
Sure.
I think that the first thing I'll say is that, and this is not necessarily right. I'm not saying this as MCBA. I'm saying this as my personal observations. And some of us, we all have different perspectives on this, but I'm a big fan of saying, okay, let's really lower the barrier to entry in the first place of not having so many limited licenses type of a setup in the first place, right? Or having so few limited licenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I know there's different theories about how we could make a more dynamic license caps. I think that that's something that has some validity to it. But I think that the first issue we really have is when we say we're going to do some super limited licenses, and then on top of that, put into that situation so many regulatory, rules that, I get it. Like, we're trying to make sure that this is done in a safe manner. It's done in a manner that, can be scaled and that can be respectable and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that, there's a lot of us working now to, when we do a lot of this work, when we look at the regulations, a lot of it is, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. We get that this might have come in 10 years ago in Colorado or Washington State because they were still trying to figure it out. But now we need to remove these kinds of things, right? Like some of the security measures, some of the camera measures, things of that nature. I don't want to get into the weeds here, no pun intended. But there's a lot of things that probably could be streamlined to make it a lot smoother and simpler, so that we're really looking at, the cannabinoids and making sure that the final product and what you're getting at the end is something that is, safe and what it says it is. And I think there's a lot of ways to get there. So that's the first thing I'll say, is that just making it not as high of a barrier in the first place would automatically make it a lot easier for a lot of people to get into the space, right? The next thing I'll say is that, and I hear what you're saying, like I mean, hear it all the time with the people are upset with a lot of social equity programs because it's like, look, like here's the social equity program. You go through 2 years of ups and downs, you get your license, and then, okay, now where's the capital, right? And especially not only where's the capital, but where's the capital for an industry and a business that is not really shown yet to be profitable, right? So you're talking about investors that need to come into a space, invest in somebody that's gone through the social equity licensing process. They've cleared all those hurdles, but now they have to have the hurdle of how do we stand up a profitable and successful business so I can get my money back as an investor, right? So, I don't know that anybody has fully solved this problem other than the one-off type of situations we see. We haven't seen the scalable solution yet. We're all working on that, right? One of the things we're doing is on our end of things is we're talking with foundations now to try to figure out how can foundations fill some of these gaps. We're talking with the state programs to see, okay, what programs are you all rolling out? Their educational technical assistance programs. What are you rolling out that are, small business grants that can maybe fill the gap that the SBA doesn't fill, right? And then where can foundations on top of that come in and fill in those gaps as well? So I think that we're still, in my opinion, we're still a little ways away from being able to have that ecosystem of investments and technical assistance and access to capital and funding to where we're really able to scale up the way we need to. But I do think people are working on this, and I see people working on it, and we're working on our little piece of it as well. So, that I don't know if that really answered your question fully, but that's kind of in a nutshell how I'm viewing that part of the problem.
Well, I mean, I think it does answer the question, and it gets to some of the key issues that I see out there. And, quite frankly, this capital barrier, like you talk about where the SBA is not helping. Well, they can help because it's a federal program. So as soon as they hear cannabis, they can't help you, right? Because of this federal prohibition, to me, is just so silly because it's first of all, it's limiting research, medical research, important medical research. And if the federal prohibition was lifted, then there'd be federal funds enabled to actually do important medical research on this product. Okay. Secondly, it's eliminating capital, and by eliminating capital, then we can't have the Small Business Administration involved. We can't have these programs involved. Thirdly, it's limiting safety, right? Because we've got this myriad of state programs, and I don't think anybody's getting it particularly right, but there's lots of different opinions. I mean, there's some states better than others, obviously. We know that. And lastly, when you look at this, there's the prohibition because of 280E, which does not help. When you can't run your business as a normal business because of 280E. So we know that can be lifted with rescheduling. And I think all of us are tired of speculating when that's going to happen. Right?
Yeah, and I'll throw out here too is, I think one of the things we'd love to see, of course, it really, when it comes down to, is descheduling. And
Yes.
I know that we talk about descheduling being sometimes people talk about it being this kind of like pie in the sky, but I don't think it has to be so pie in the sky. I think that we're also looking at, a presidential, presidency that's coming into play right now that, I know that there's a lot of mixed feelings in the industry, right? And I get that, right? And there's also more than just cannabis at stake here too. And I get that, right? But end of the day, this president did sign into to law the farm bill that effectively did legalize cannabis and cannabinoids to a certain extent. And so the next natural progression could be descheduling. And that could actually be a move that could help a lot of businesses across the board. Now, I know there's a lot of tension in some camps between hemp and cannabis, but I also know there's a lot of people that are in cannabis that have also made the migration into the hemp space and vice versa, right? So I think it's a lot more complex than people sometimes are painting it out to be, where it's hemp versus cannabis. I think there's a lot of overlap here. And if we can really collaborate and work together, and also work with this administration that's coming in and work with the new Senate that'll be, the new leadership, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's lean into what they already started putting in place, the Farm Bill, and let's figure out how to maybe bridge the gap between the Farm Bill and some of these state programs in a way that can be sensible, where everybody still wins, right? Like you have the folks that are more concerned with public health that maybe the Farm Bill type stuff doesn't address. And then on the other side, you have folks that are like, okay, like Let's figure out how to, be able to still do business in a functional manner. So by bridging those gaps, I think we can actually get to a solution that works. And hemp beverages, I think, are a great way that we're kind of seeing that gap being bridged right now.
Yes.
Year or two ago, even a year ago, people still thought it was still nuts. Now it's not so nuts. So, shout out to Ben Larson, by the way, and a lot of the work that he's been doing leading the charge there. So, anyway.
Absolutely. And listen, if the president-elect does what he says he was going to do, he did make the statement that he would move forward safer banking and he would move forward rescheduling at the very least, right? And would make that happen. So, I think we could remain bullish that we will see something positive happen. And if his health person, Kennedy, after he's done going after our Skittles, and our Starburst, that he could, you just have to pay attention to realize that there's medical benefit here and there needs to be safety. So, Taylor, we have a comment from live from one of the our audience members. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, happily.
Okay. My concern with social equity has been with no assistance with helping the candidates understand their product with the science. You have to understand what you have with that product to sustain the business. What do you think about that, Mike?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Keith, for the question. I think that what you're bringing up here is also just sometimes, with new entrepreneurs and social equity entrepreneurs, but new entrepreneurs in general, a lot of times there's a gap in general about what it is that, whether the product, the science, some of the business stuff, the financial stuff, right? New entrepreneurs have a high learning curve. And I think that what we need, to your point, is a lot more education. It's something that comes up pretty much every workshop we do. People talk about, we need more education, we need more education. And I think this comes down to all of us at the end of the day, right? Making sure we're working with the researchers, making sure we're supporting folks in doing that research. And research doesn't always have to be done necessarily through, just the whole double blind type of situation. There's lots of ways that research can be done. Like, for example, Otis Smith III has, a great tool called Tetragram that helps to really collect data on how people interact with their different cannabinoids and things of that nature. And I think the more that we can kind of support these types of initiatives and efforts, while also looking into, folks like ACHEM, right? Dr. Rachel Knox and ACHEM, I can never remember the acronym, but, a lot of medical professionals that are basically doing exactly that kind of work and making sure people understand, the science of it better, as well as how that impacts communities at the same time. So I think it's about, leaning into education, leaning into people that are doing that education, and also leaning into more research and looking for creative ways to conduct research, like a tetragram, for example. So if we can do that and bridge those gaps, I think that, that's actually a huge area that social equity licensees and applicants, by leaning into that space, I believe, can really start separating themselves and differentiating themselves from a lot of the more bigger box stores that tend to not lean into the science as much, for whatever reasons, right? So that's my take. I think it actually could be a huge competitive advantage if done correctly and strategically.
Absolutely. And thanks for that comment, Keith. And I couldn't agree more that product level science and what Mike said, absolutely, that we need to sort of, I don't know. I just think when you walk into some of these dispensaries, there's one thing saying, hey, I'm a bud tender, and I have a great respect for the bud tender and their role. But we got to arm them with better information, with more science-based information. So we're not just having a conversation about, the strain anymore, sativa or indica. It's like the product goes way beyond that. And I think that we need to provide those tools. So, more on that in an episode of Qredible, coming up. So we'll talk about that. But, there's, to me, when you look at sort of what's going on out there, I'd like you to sort of talk a little bit about some of the problems that face the industry when we talk about the integration of the community itself as this industry becomes increasingly more regulated. I think that, because I've talked to some regulators where they talk about empowerment, not just enforcement, they talk about empowerment. And I think that's really an important concept. So we don't look at regulatory, so we make it so difficult for people to move, but we look at it in a way that empowers people through safety and transparency, where it's sort of a tool. That's my thoughts about it, but I want to hear you sort of talk about this whole integration of the community.
Yeah, I'll bring up, and forgive me, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was on stage at the CANRA conference, CANRA external meeting in June. A social equity applicant or licensee out of New York, Cheryl Murray Powell, brought him out there with, through the Justice. I think he's actually, I want to say, on the board now at Justice. And so, what he said was I thought, really resonated well with people in that room. And I think was really important was he said that regulators need to understand that right now there is no real trust between legacy and regulators. And that if we're really going to bridge this gap, if we're going to really do this in a way that does reach the community properly, that we need to bridge that gap of trust that between regulators and legacy. And I think that from my perspective, one, 100% agree with him, but two, I think that, we have to create more environments that allow for the conversations for trust to be built in the first place, right? And that's part of what we're doing with the Equity Workshop Tour. It's not a salve that's going to solve all of that, right? But, when you have a regulator, for example, in New York, right, the OCM, they've been under a lot of fire, but there's also a lot of great people in that office who have done a lot of great work. And so Tabitha Robinson, for example, came to our last workshop in the middle of massive rainstorm. She was delayed by accidents and everything. Everybody, this was, not an excuse, right? She was delayed and she showed up like late, but right there, ready to go, and answered questions openly, and was, knew that she might be under fire that day even, right? But that kind of action to me is huge, because it shows, look, we want to build the trust. We want to have the communication. We can't always go solve the problem or kind of do exactly what you want us to do right now, they're saying, but by having these conversations, continue to have those conversations, we can build the trust. And I think that's the most important thing to me. I don't think there's any one salve of how we're going to, figure out how to integrate community with regulated cannabis. But I think that, when the regulators make the effort and the attempt to be in the rooms and have open dialogue and conversation, that's a huge first step. We can't always control what the regulators do. So then it's also up to us to make sure that as communities, we're coming together and we're not being divided and conquered, and we are collaborating and working, regardless of whether we agree on everything, figuring out how to be in lockstep. So when we do go and advocate with regulators and legislators, we're hitting them from different angles, but with similar messages, right? So I think all those things combined, just having more conversation, being strategic in it, and really being, at the end of the day, vulnerable with it, I think is what's going to get us there to where we can see a lot more community-oriented, ways of interacting in cannabis, so to speak.
Well, to me, I think if it starts at the top at a federal level, and we're hearing good messaging from POTUS, right, and his administration, and I pray that does happen, right, that he follows through and makes these things happen. And I've seen all sorts of different discourses on this of he's got too many other things to deal with. Well, he's proven that he could deal with a bunch of stuff. So let's put that into action and see if this happens, because I think if it starts from the top, it starts to loosen up at the state level, right? And it provides better public support, within these states, to be able to drive these very important topics and solutions. And I know some states are doing better jobs than others. I think you had mentioned before, I don't know if you still feel this way, that Minnesota was one of those states that was showing great promise and doing some of the right things. Any other states that you feel that are sort of leading the charge in the right direction here?
Yeah, well, first off, I'll say I still do believe very strongly that Minnesota has a great opportunity here to get things right. And I think, again, it comes back to the people there. I've seen the real efforts on their part, the people in those offices, to really try to get this right and really reach out to community connect. I know, of course, there's complaints, and right now there's all the stuff going on there. But at the end of the day, I think that, I want to stay patient with them, stay patient with that process. And I think that there's still a lot that can be done there. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is, I just want to agree with you 100% that I think that, if we can get, and this is where us pressuring and making sure this is top of mind for the federal government, whether it's the, POTUS, whether it's the, the legislature, making sure that this stays top of mind, because if they got all these other things to deal with, this is an easy fix. Go ahead and deschedule, decriminalize, make it easy and simple, and then let the states, let us all figure it out. And then that's where our work also comes into play, where we have to make sure that we get those other, legislative pieces that protect certain rights and make sure that, we do have an equitable industry at the end of the day. And then also make sure at that point, now to your point, now we can get into it with the states and say, okay, this is the directive from the top. Here's now that ambiguity is gone. Now let's figure out how to make this work together from a state by state basis. And we can also identify the good players and the bad players a little bit easier as a result. I would say, as far as the question of, which states are getting it right, I mean, I think you said this earlier, hitting on the head. No state has gotten it right, but a lot of states are doing good things and a lot of states are messing it up in other ways, right? So, I think it's easy for people to look and just kind of complain and say, oh, that state's messed up. It's a total mess and so on and so forth. Yeah, okay. And it's also, there's a lot of work to be done and nobody thought that this was going to be something that was going to take 1 year and you have a perfect industry in a state, right? So, Sherry Murray Powell, one of the things I appreciate about her leadership is she's constantly pointing out, hey, we have to be thinking about what this looks like 10 years from now. And you don't get to 10 years without a whole lot of struggle and ups and downs in between, but you have to be focused on that, what happens 10 years from now. And so I think every state, when we look at it through that lens, still has the opportunity to still get this right. Even a state like Colorado that's been out of the box for a lot of years now, they have some great leadership there, right? They have a lot of great people in the industry. They have great people in the med, and there's still the possibility to get this right. Maybe not tomorrow, but over time, So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, well, they've been at it a lot longer, right? So I always like to say, when you're at something for a while and you're making mistakes, you hopefully learn from those mistakes and you improve. So, but that really speaks to, you think some of these states would look really into what's going on in some of these other states and see what's worked, what didn't work. And that's the benefit of not being the first, right? Or at least in the top 5. So hopefully they'll learn from some of that wisdom. Do you see any other solutions that you're noticing coming up, and your opinion are the most effective to solve some of these issues?
I think one of the best things that a state can do right now, and that advocacy and leaders can do right now, is also to really, again, build that ecosystem out, not just focus on the licensees getting a license, but how do we make sure that those licensees are successful 2, 3, 4 years down the road? And that's going to be through developing the full ecosystem. And so the government, regulatory agencies can support this through their grants that they provide to, and the kind of meetings that they provide and things like that really bring in the ancillary folks as well, right? That we're supporting ancillary opportunities in the industry. Maryland did a recent conference, I want to say earlier this year, where they actually were, to my knowledge, they were the first state sanctioned ancillary focused conference, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that I think was a huge, bellwether to say, okay, we need to build the whole ecosystem. So that's one thing I think that all states can really be doing. I think, again, the more that they look to collaborate, to your point, the more they look to see what went wrong in different places. And that happens not just by doing a quick internet search. It happens through having open dialogue. It happens through reaching out to organizations like MCBA, M4M, groups that are already doing that work in all these places. And I see it happening, right? I mean, like I mentioned Colorado. I mean, I see Colorado making the moves to try to figure this out, right? I mean, to your point, they were first, right? So when you're first, of course, there's going to be some problems. And we can all point to a lot of the problems that were there at the beginning. But, as long as you're continuing to iterate and continuing to figure that out, I think that, I don't know. I think, to me, that's how we get there. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, that does make sense. And you're doing such great work that I want people to be aware of the work that you're doing and how they can get involved, how they can help. So talk to us about, how people can get involved and how they can support you and learn more about what you're doing. And, what do they have to go to? Where do they have to go on the internet to find more info?
So minoritycannabis.org, definitely check us out there. Personally, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm semi-active on there. I mean, if you hit me up there, I'll definitely get back to you. It might take a minute, but I will get back to you there. We also have an active page there on LinkedIn through Minority Cannabis Business Association. I can't remember exact, sign and all that kind of stuff, but minoritycannabis.org for the website, Minority Cannabis Business Association. Do a search for us on LinkedIn. I'll say this also, for moving into 2025, we are focused on being a grassroots organization. And that, I think that's seen through the way we've done the Equity Workshop Tour. We're about to put out our revamped, or we're going to start working on a revamped equity report, which was a great work we did a few years back, before my time at the organization. And we're going to do that again in 2025 with our new president, Federica Easley, really leading the charge on that and really soliciting information and finding out what's going on at the ground everywhere else to revamp that. If you want to get involved with either that, the tour, all the other things we're doing as an organization, go ahead and sign up as a member through the links you can find on the website. Reach out to us. We're very approachable, and we want to collaborate. We want to work with people. And even more so, we want to work with people that really have said, yeah, like, I want to partner with you guys. I want to be a member. I want to be like officially engaged in some capacity. We have lots of partnerships with organizations all over the country, media sponsors, all this kind of jazz, because we really believe in collaboration.
Well, I was kidding Mike earlier. I said he needs to get one of those buses, since he travels all the time and he's going from hotel room to hotel room in every major city. And we were just talking about how, like, when I was traveling, how difficult it was. You don't even know where you are half the time. So at least if you're on your bus, you'll know you're always on your bus, and everybody will see you rolling into town, and he'll be kind of like the John Madden Express.
There you go. Yeah, and look, man, like, being on the road, it's good, it's bad, but the nice thing now is that with the phone, this thing right here, as you can attest to, I'm sure, it's made travel so much easier, right? Like,
Amen.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Amen. So I remember when they first started offering internet on flights, my staff would be like, "Oh no, he's on a long flight. That means he's going to be looking at everything and sending us questions and more work to do." So anyway, Mike, you're doing such great work. You're a wonderful advocate, and I really really urge folks to continue to support and start to support these efforts. They're very important for the future of our industry. And speaking of the future of our industry, next Friday we'll have Josh Kincaid on, and we'll be talking about the future of the industry. So Mike, thanks so much for joining, especially the day after Thanksgiving when we're probably still in turkey comas, but we appreciate it and the great work you're doing. So thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.